Greetings everyone, Francis Fernando here. Hashtag how much will I make? My mantra when it comes to investing in real estate is if you are going to take time out of your busy schedule from work and you're going to allocate that time to investing in real estate, and you're going to take your hard-earned money that you've saved, that you've sweated for, and you're going to allocate that into a real estate asset, then that real estate asset should deliver you a continuous stream of income. I like to call it a measurable cash-on-cash return. You place some cash into a transaction, that cash should work for you like a soldier delivering you results back. That's my mantra when it comes to real estate. So today we are going to be discussing a very important topic known as distressed real estate, or more specifically in the marketplace known as foreclosures. How do you buy a foreclosed property and an REO asset? There's a distinct difference between the two, and I believe there's a misnomer in the industry or in the marketplace that foreclosures and REOs are the same. They are not. There is a distinct difference, and we'll get into that. We'll explore the subtle differences between the two. And the intent of this video is to make sure that you're comfortable with the foreclosure process. And so what I've done is I'm actually breaking it up into 2 episodes just because I like short, chunkable pieces of content that's digestible, and I don't want to go on for way too long where we end up losing my trusted and loyal listeners. So I want this to be of value to you, so these are short segments. So segment number 1 is in the foreclosure process. How does a foreclosure even come into being? How does it even happen? And then in part 2, which would be the next podcast and video series, will be how do you in fact purchase a REO, how do you get prepared for it, and how do you ready yourself so that you have the confidence to actually make a purchase, and then the stabilization and all that. But before that, I think it's important to understand the historical or the path as to how a property comes into being, or how a foreclosure comes into being. So I'm going to start with a quick story. I was working in Nassau County a few months ago, and I was conducting a foreclosure. So I was at Nassau County, which is right outside of it's in New York City. And I was conducting some foreclosure auctions for a big lender, a large multinational lender. And as I was conducting this foreclosure auction, I noticed there was a couple of individuals that were buying multiple properties in one setting. In one sitting, they were buying multiple properties. And for those of you that know the New York City market, we're talking top value properties. So even at foreclosure, these properties are fetching $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, and they're buying multiple properties. This one individual in particular ended up having quite a few transactions with me, and it totaled, a quick rough number, it totaled about $3 million worth of real estate. So me being the inquisitive, hey, I want to know how he is able to fund these, what's his game plan, but I also wanted to be respectful of his privacy. So as we were closing out the transaction, I looked at him and I said, hey, you're pretty well funded. Congratulations on the purchases today, you're pretty well funded. And he looked at me and he joked around and he said, with a smirk on his face, he looked at me and he said, well, technically, I am not well funded, but my hard money lender is well funded. So the point of the story there is, don't get intimidated when you see people at these foreclosure auctions, or that seemingly understand the process and that seemingly have the whereabouts to purchase them, and that seemingly seem to have all the systems and the know-how and the connections with the county house clerks, with the attorneys that are involved in these foreclosures, with the bank representatives. They may in fact, but really all they've done is they're a couple of steps ahead of us, or you if you're watching this video, in that they just know the process. And like everything in life, it's simply a process. You understand the process on how to secure a foreclosure, on how to, what leads up into a property becoming a foreclosure. That way you can look at the entire process and say, hey, where are the areas that I can insert myself in to bring value to this transaction, be it to the lender or be it to the homeowner that's losing the property, and how can I benefit? How can I create a benefit for them, but how can I also benefit? I'm a firm believer, and sort of my other mantra in life in general is everything has to be a win-win. We're not in this for ourselves. I think life and business is an ecosystem where we are all there to play a part, add value, and ultimately grow the entire system. That's just my mantra. So the point of my story was, I don't want you to get intimidated by individuals like that. You're going to come across those people. The fact that he shared that story with me tells me he's not well funded, and he disclosed this to me, is that he's not well funded, but he understands the hard money system and how to negotiate and how to secure hard money financing. And he knows that's part and parcel of his whole foreclosure system, as far as buying, stabilizing, and then paying off the hard money lenders. I have done an episode on hard money. I am very familiar with that process. I have used hard money. I know hard money lenders. I in fact represent some hard money lenders. I'm working on a hard money transaction right now. That is a humongous transaction, probably one of the biggest transactions that I would have done. So I'm learning so much from it. And there's so much to understand in it. But like anything in real estate, the beauty with real estate is that it's so flexible, and it's so there's so much creativity that can be placed in real estate. So let's jump right into the foreclosure process. I want to, again, make you understand, and the purpose of this episode is to make you understand, how does a property even become a foreclosure? Now, my main disclosure here, or my big disclosure here, is that I am speaking at a very high level as to the foreclosure process. This process will differ based on where you are living. This is a United States-based foreclosure process that I'm speaking about, but within the United States, based on your local county, based on the state, based on your municipality, there are going to be subtle differences. So please heed that disclosure with extreme caution. If you are outside of the country and listening to this video, such as Canada or anywhere in the world, the processes are going to be distinctly different, but the overall system is somewhat going to be the same. So here's how a foreclosure process works at a very high level. And I have a process sheet that I'm going to show you here, because I'm an engineer and I love process. So let's get down to the basics. A borrower has a mortgage, right? Borrower has purchased a home, has a mortgage. Let's say it's a regular single family home, so it's not even an investment property. It's the same process if it was an investment property. But they purchased a home, and they are happily living in this home, and they live in this home for 5 years. Again, this is a fictitious story, but it's to illustrate the process of a foreclosure. They've lived in this house for 5 years, and they are faced upon a challenge. And the challenge typically comes in the form of one of 3 Ds. D1, D2, and D3. And I'll explain what D1, D2, and D3 are. These are the 3 Ds for you investors this is where there's an opportunity for you. If you notice this, you know there's an opportunity. And it's not to take advantage of people, but there's an opportunity at one of these 3 Ds. D number 1 is death. If there is a death in a family, there's usually an estate, and many times that estate, based on the family setting, there's opportunity there, because maybe the kids are not interested in the property, maybe the kids have moved on in their life, maybe there was so much disconnect in the family, discontentment in the family that no property was left to anyone, so there was so much dispute in the family. So death is D number 1, is opportunity number 1. D number 2, or our opportunity number 2, is divorce. If there is a divorce in a family, usually real estate becomes a big part of the equation. Who gets the house? Who gets to keep the house? How much equity is in the house? Should we liquidate the property? If we do, what do we do? When there's arguments in there, typically there's an opportunity there. Death, divorce, and the last D, D number 3, is desperation. Desperation is mostly an economic condition that has been thrown into this family, or an unfortunate circumstance. Maybe it's an illness, maybe it's the loss of a job, maybe it's a corporate transfer, maybe it is an extremely sick child or parent, or some form of desperation has happened to this family, unfortunately, and they are tapping into the equity of their home, or they are forced to sell the home. Now, from the standpoint of, like I mentioned, this is an unfortunate circumstance for that family, but from the standpoint of an investor, right, it could be an opportunity. Now, my approach is, if I am negotiating a deal like that, I'm going to make sure that it's an advantageous approach for myself, but also for the person I'm transacting with. So never do I want to take advantage of anyone. So part of my advice here is to make sure that we are conscious business entrepreneurs, that we are conscious of our environment, we're conscious of our fellow mankind. Because if we learn how to play in the sandbox and not pick up the sand and throw it in people's faces, I believe ultimately that's where success lays. Having that clear conscious that when you put your head down at night, you know that you have done the best for yourself and for your community and for every other human being that's out there trying to exist in this world. So I digress. Back to the process. So step number 1 is that the borrower has been paying their mortgage for 5 years. They fall into one of those 3 Ds, and they stop paying their mortgage. They stop paying their mortgage. Now what happens is, every 30 days, typically your mortgage payment is due. Maybe it's every 2 weeks, depending on your payment schedule. But typically it's every 30 days, once a month, you have a mortgage payment due to the lender. And what will happen is the lender, upon the first 30 days of missing that mortgage, the lender will do a combined effort of letters, phone calls, you name it, smoke signals, you name it. The lender will attempt to reach out to you in the hopes that this is a mere neglect on your part and you just haven't paid your mortgage. But they will try to communicate with the borrower. My advice to a borrower, if this is a borrower listening to this, it's important to stay in communication with the lender. Do not go dark on the lender, because if you go dark on the lender, if you are the borrower that is unfortunately going through this, do not go dark on the lender, because then they assume the worst and they are going to accelerate their process. Keep the lines of communication open. So this process is going to take place, go back and forth, where the lender is going to attempt to reach out to the borrower for 90 days. For approximately 90 days. Now folks, I want you to remember my disclaimer. That is the general process. Your municipality might be different, your location, your state, your region might be very specific and very different. It could be 60 days, it could be 120 days. But in general, it's 90 days. At the 90-day mark, the lender is going to send the borrower a 90-day notice of foreclosure. And it's basically a letter, and it'll likely be served registered mail, it'll be communicated via email, whatever mechanism they use. It'll be a 90-day notice of foreclosure that states that you are in default of your mortgage, you are in default of the obligation that we have, the note, the real estate mortgage note that was signed. You're in default of that, and because you're in default of that, we have to bring the ownership of this property into question, and we are hereby demanding that we get paid. That will occur, and shortly after that, the bank will send, sort of sometimes in concurrence with that, they will also send what's called an acceleration letter. An acceleration letter, for those of you that don't know, if you look at your mortgage, not statement, but your terms of your mortgage, basically the note, the agreement that you signed on closing with the bank, there was an agreement, a promissory note to pay the lender the amount of money that you borrowed from them. There's a clause in there known as the acceleration clause. Now, it might be called something different on your, each borrower has a different phrase that they use, but it's typically called an acceleration clause. That acceleration clause states that if there's any material changes to the terms of this agreement, to the terms of me as a lender extending funds to you as a borrower, if there's any changes to that, material changes to that, or lack of performance on that clause, then the lender has the right to accelerate the mortgage, demanding that the entire mortgage be paid in full. So an acceleration letter will be sent out. At this point, still, the official foreclosure process has still not started. This is the preliminary steps where the bank is getting ready, or the lender is getting ready, saying, hey, we need to sort of get our ducks in a row. It looks like this mortgage is going south. The next step that happens, again, depending on the region, it's going to be 30 to 45 days after. It's very different. Up until this point, actually even beyond this point, but during this phase, as a homeowner that's losing the property, or as an investor, there are many different things that can happen. You can still negotiate with the bank. That's why I say it's very important to keep the lines of communication open. You can, as a borrower or as a real estate investor attempting to save the borrower, you can speak with the loss mitigation department of the bank. That is, again, the loss mitigation department of the bank, and start trying to negotiate either a short sale or some form of forgiveness, loan modification. Explain the circumstances that you're going, if you are the borrower, explain the circumstances that you're going through. If you're an investor, work with the loss mitigation, saying that you have approval with the homeowner and you're attempting to negotiate a short sale. So that is a whole separate subject, but this is typically where those kind of transactions do happen. The next step after the acceleration letter is actually the first step in the official foreclosure filing, and this is called a lis pendens. This is the formal commencement of a foreclosure. It's filed with the court along with a copy going to the borrower, right? And basically the lender is letting the courts know and letting yourself know that we are now disputing the ownership of this piece of real estate. This real estate ownership is in question because the deed is in the name of the borrower. However, the lender has a mortgage that is secured by that piece of real estate, and the lender is telling the bank that we need to question the ownership or the owner of record of this because of a default in the terms of the note that secures that property, or the property that secures that note, the other way around. So that's called a lis pendens, L-I-S-P-E-N-D-E-N-S, lis pendens. The next step after lis pendens is the lender is going to attempt to file a motion of judgment. Now, right around the same time that the lis pendens is filed and they're filing the motion for judgment, the courts are going to require that they have a settlement conference. They're going to bring both parties together and say, hey, listen, can we settle this? This is why, again, I urge you, if you are the borrower, do not go dark or go silent on the lender. Keep the lines of communication up. If you do get the opportunity to go to a settlement conference, I urge you to do that. The settlement conference is a discussion where you try to work out the terms of this dispute or this potential foreclosure filing. So motion for judgment will then be filed, and that's basically where the lender is asking the courts to make a judgment in their defense, saying that yes, we have determined that the mortgage has not been paid and that the borrower is in violation of the terms of the note or the mortgage note, and the proper notifications have been taken and adhered to by the lender. So in other words, they have made the phone calls early on in the process. They did file the 90-day notice of foreclosure. They did have an acceleration clause in their note, and they did notify and initiate the acceleration clause, and they did file a lis pendens. They will make sure that the courts will make sure that all of the foreclosure process has been properly adhered to. If that is the case, I'm shortening a lot of these steps that go on here, but if that is the case, they will issue what is called the courts will issue what's called a notice of sale, an NOS, notice of sale, basically indicating that the property has now been rubber stamped, ready to be foreclosed, and the foreclosure process and filing has been approved. The lender has the rights to take this property into auction. This is the point, it's a very critical point here, and this is the point where the homeowner, the borrower, the homeowner has lost his rights of his or her rights of redemption. In other words, they cannot resurrect themselves. They cannot have this bundle of money, that's hiding maybe under their mattress, and go to the bank and say, hey, we want to settle this. The bank will not accept a settlement in this case. So their borrower has lost all their rights of redemption. From an investor standpoint, it's important to realize that also the short sale process is pretty much done. You cannot really negotiate a short sale once there is a notice of sale that has been approved. A short sale is trying to circumvent that and trying to make a negotiation before it gets to that point. When it gets to that point, it's going to plow through. Really, there are a couple of nuances, and I don't want to speak from an attorney standpoint, but there are a couple of nuances. I believe there is a bankruptcy filing that could halt something at this point, but again, I don't want to make any suggestions. This is a very legal area that we're working on. So for all intents and purposes, for the purpose of this video, from a process standpoint, once the notice of sale has been issued, the next step is the property goes in for auction. And that's the world that we get into of foreclosures and REOs. So, and the auction is where now there's a public auction, there's a public notification, usually on law journals, usually on the local newspapers. Based on your local region, you may want to figure out where your foreclosures are being posted. One such company in the U.S. that operates in the U.S. in most states is auction.com. They will have a lot of the listings of all the foreclosures. So check out the different options and the different, based on your location, where these foreclosure notices have been posted. So the foreclosure notification, again, is at that's the schedule of an auction, right? It's been scheduled for auction. At auction, one of two things can happen. The property, step one is it's going to go into foreclosure. That's a foreclosure auction. That's either an in-person or online auction where people bid on the property. It is still owned by the borrower who's lost it to foreclosure, but technically the property is still occupied, and in most instances is still occupied, and the foreclosure, once the coming down of the gavel happens, that foreclosure then takes the ownership record out of the current owner and puts it into a foreclosure deed, which then eventually becomes the responsibility of the new buyer to take that into their ownership record. So it's sold at foreclosure. If the property does not sell at foreclosure, then the property becomes an REO. So that's the difference. If the property does not sell at foreclosure, it becomes an REO. An REO is where the bank buys it. So in other words, the auction has been authorized. The auction may take place at the property or at the county courthouse. Investors typically come to bid on that property. If it sells, at foreclosure, it's sold, and sells out to a third party. If it does not sell, there's no buyer interested in that property, or no one outbids the bank because the bank is securing its position, then it becomes an REO, real estate owned, which means it's a bank-owned property. The bank then takes ownership of that property. So that's the entire foreclosure process. I have a foreclosure process document here, or a process flow that I want to show you, and hopefully you can see this. And what I will do is I will make this available on the notes, or you can shoot me an email, connect with me to get a process flow, a more detailed process flow of what occurs. But again, I will show you this just so that you get a second glance at it. This is the foreclosure process that I just covered. So as I mentioned to you, this video was mostly about this episode was mostly about how a property becomes a foreclosure. And I think it's important to understand the process so you can figure out, as an investor, or if you're a borrower, you can figure out how to navigate the waters here. Part 2 of this episode that I will do shortly is, once you're at that auction and you're now negotiating, should I buy it at foreclosure or should I buy it at REO? How do you do that? How do you do the due diligence to make sure that you're buying the right property, so you're minimizing your risk? It's really a confidence developer. How do you develop the confidence to go out there and do that? And then ultimately, how do you buy it and scale yourself up so that you're taking advantage of the distressed real estate market? So I know this video was of value to you. I really, really, really appreciate your time. I encourage you to really take that opportunity to understand distressed real estate. I call it the red ocean, blue ocean. Red ocean is where everyone is competing. They're buying properties off of the MLS, and there's everyone and their grandmother trying to buy properties. Then the blue ocean is the distressed real estate, the foreclosures and the REOs, and there's less people in this pond and in this pool, and the reason being, there are systems, such as what I just shared with you. There are systems and processes, and there are nuances that you need to understand. But with that sort of, slid into those nuances and that complication is an opportunity for you. So good luck in distressed real estate. Reach out to me, like I have said in every single one of my episodes. I love real estate. I love business. I love entrepreneurship. I love people that are looking to do good in our communities, that are responsible, socially good entrepreneurs, real estate investors. This is the market I work in. Reach out to me. I am an accessible person, and I would love to help you with your real estate needs. Thank you so much, guys.